We as fans of the medium of video games can be pretty excitable. You just have to look at the various industry events throughout the year to see examples of how crazy we get over games. But sometimes the hype train can fly off the tracks a bit, leaving us disappointed when a developer's final product doesn't meet the lofty expectations we set. I'm Josh the Top Hat Gamer, and these are 10 of the most overhyped games of all time. Some ground rules before we begin. Only games that I've personally experienced are eligible. This means obvious entries like Daikatana and 2 Human won't be appearing on this list. Obviously, this is a subjective topic, and everything on display is just my personal opinion. Without further ado, let's get started. Number 10. Assassin's Creed Revelations. I've been a fan of the Assassin's Creed series since the very beginning, and like many others, I'd become attached to Italian playboy and stabbing enthusiast Ezio Auditore. When Revelations was announced, it had a lot going for it. AC Revelations promised to be Ezio's swan song, while revealing hidden mysteries of the Assassin Order and giving players gameplay options that they'd never seen before. Plus, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't think that one cinematic trailer was the coolest goddamn thing ever. Unfortunately, the final chapter of everyone's favorite assassin fell kinda flat, with a bland narrative that had little bearing on the series as a whole, and a handful of gameplay features that sounded good on paper, but underwhelmed in practice. Whether it was the lackluster gameplay additions or just the early stages of franchise fatigue, Assassin's Creed Revelations failed to live up to the hype. Number 9. Destiny. In 2013, Bungie was looking to secure their place in the new generation of consoles with the big reveal of Destiny, a sci-fi adventure that would allow players to blast their way across the galaxy on their own or with their friends. I'd never really been interested in the Halo series, but it was clear that those games were made by a very talented team, and seeing them work on something so far removed from their previous work piqued my interest. Various presentations leading up to the game's release showed off stunning environments and action-packed gameplay with seamless multiplayer, but what we ended up with didn't quite hit the mark. The multiplayer was fine, and while the moment-to-moment gameplay delivered, Destiny failed to meet expectations in a number of different ways. For starters, while the in-game universe was interesting, you had to go to a completely different website if you wanted to learn anything about it. On top of that, the single-player offerings were paltry at best, and once they were exhausted, there wasn't a lot more you could do on your own. While some of the game's shortcomings have since been fixed with additional content and ongoing updates, for some players like myself, it was too little, too late. Number 8. The Order 1886. The early years of any console generation are always tumultuous, and it's make or break time for new IPs in particular. Revealed not long after the PS4, The Order 1886 promised players an alternate universe where London is protected by steampunk knights against an unknown threat that lurks in the shadows. Every single time we saw this game up to its release, it looked incredible, with stunning visuals that really sold the idea of a new generation of consoles to so many eager gamers. And in fairness, The Order 1886 delivered on its incredible visuals, showcasing some of the most technically impressive graphics in the gaming industry. Unfortunately, top-notch visuals and a couple of cool gameplay tricks were all that The Order really had, and its standard cover-based combat, combined with a story that felt like the prologue to something greater, left many wanting so much more. Number 7. Star Wars Battlefront. Star Wars is great, and there are few better uses of the franchise than the Battlefront series of games. Anyone who played Star Wars Battlefront 2 knows how good these games can be, allowing you to fill the boots of soldiers fighting for the Rebellion or the Empire, and even letting you play as some of the most well-known heroes of the franchise. To become the best entry in the series, the new Star Wars Battlefront would have to pull out all the stops, and unfortunately, the hype train began rolling as soon as the game was announced. DICE, to their credit, did try to temper fans' expectations by announcing that certain features would not make the final cut, and with no substantial single-player content to speak of and the omission of space combat setting the tone for Battlefront's eventual release, fans were already feeling the start of the disappointment. Regrettably, nothing could prepare players for a severe lack in multiplayer content, considering that was all the game really had. No matter how authentic the game looked or sounded, there just wasn't enough to keep myself and so many others from being utterly disappointed. Number 6. Evolve. Asymmetrical multiplayer is a relatively new concept in video games, and Evolve was definitely one of the first games to base its entire existence around the concept. With a neat gimmick that pitted teams of 4 hunters against a beast that would gradually get stronger and stronger as the game went on, Turtle Rock Studios were onto something special. Constantly being paraded around at industry events and public demos, Evolve was consistently looking like the multiplayer game of the season. Alas, Evolve was unable to capitalize on its strong core concept, leaving players craving more content which, in the eyes of some, had been locked away as pre-order incentives or as further DLC later down the line. And in my personal opinion, it was downright criminal to have a cast of such diverse, interesting characters wasted on a purely multiplayer experience, without any sort of world building or external narrative to make use of them. Number 5. Mighty Number 9. And now we get to the game that inspired this list. It's easy to see just how much people wanted a brand new Mega Man game, and by helping one of the men most commonly associated with the Blue Bomber hit over 4 times the funding goal on Kickstarter, fans thought they knew what to expect with Mighty Number 9. Hopes were raised even further when stunning, visually dynamic concept art started making the rounds, causing many to believe that this was how Mighty Number 9 would look in its final form. How much further from the truth could these hopes be? Mighty Number 9 not only failed to live up to the lofty gameplay standards set by its spiritual predecessor, but it didn't even manage to live up to the visual style that was shown off during its development. Mighty Number 9 is one of the few games on this list that is not only disappointing, but just straight up bad. Number 4. Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs will live on in infamy as one of the worst cases of graphical downgrades in video games to date. It initially blew audiences away during its reveal at E3 2012, with stunning visuals accompanying dynamic gameplay helping to set Watch Dogs apart from anything available at the time. Perhaps unveiling Watch Dogs so early was a misstep on Ubisoft's part, as it would appear constantly for over 2 years after the reveal, building plenty of anticipation along the way. So when the game did finally come out, it was merely alright, with functional gameplay and graphical quality that paled in comparison to the stunning footage released so long ago. Adding to the disappointment was a lackluster story, and Ubisoft's usual slew of open world content, a tradition that had long since gone stale. I can't help but wonder if the game would have been received more positively if it hadn't had such a long time to build hype, or relied on preview footage that made the final product look worse off by comparison. Number 3. Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem was an iconic series back in the 90s. You couldn't think of the shooter genre without thinking of the one-liner spouting, womanizing Duke. But the highly anticipated Duke Nukem Forever was, ironically, taking forever to release. Originally announced back in '97, it wouldn't see the light of day until almost 14 whole years later, after various setbacks and a developer swap. So after all that time, Duke Nukem Forever had to be worth the wait, right? As it turns out, nah, not really. To this day, I still feel like Duke Nukem could make a triumphant return in the right hands, but in the hands of Gearbox, Forever was absolute garbage. Ugly visuals and unpolished gameplay made the game a chore to play, while Duke's personality hadn't aged well over the course of the game's development. After such a long road, Duke Nukem Forever would have been disappointing no matter what, but it turned out far worse than anyone could have expected. Number 2. Aliens Colonial Marines. It's hard to find a video game adaptation of anything that manages to be better than merely okay, and in the year leading up to Aliens Colonial Marines' release, it looked like fans of the franchise were about to get that rare, high-quality adaptation. Much of the footage shown before Colonial Marines hit store shelves showed off tense, terrifying encounters with the titular space monsters, with impressive visuals that brought the spirit of the source material to life. Unfortunately for the fans who have been so incredibly excited for the game, it turns out that Gearbox Software weren't entirely honest with much of the footage they had shown off. The atmospheric presentation and tense alien encounters had been replaced with visuals that appeared almost unfinished, and practically non-existent enemy AI. Not only that, but the game retcons lore from the movies too, not content with keeping the poor quality contained to this one extremely disappointing video game. Number 1. Fable. The entire series. If you wanted to find a game series synonymous with overhype, you need look no further than Fable. Peter Molyneux, now infamous for constantly overselling his games, is at the very core of what made the Fable series memorable. While they were mostly fine games in their own right, it was hard to separate them from the lofty claims that Molyneux would make about them during development. He promised real-time aging, wildly open adventures, and even mentioned systems that now sound suspiciously like the much-lauded Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor. He basically made it sound like the Fable games would introduce a number of frankly ludicrous elements that, in reality, would never see the light of day. Like I said, these games were generally a good time, but thanks to Mr. Molyneux and his unstoppable hype rants, the series will forever be remembered as not delivering on his promises. And there you have it, 10 of the most overhyped games of all time. As I mentioned, this is just my list, so I'd love to hear about more games that you guys thought were overhyped, leading to your disappointment. Let me know down in the comments, and game on!